Then Gandalf, seeing the madness that was on him, feared that he had already done some evil deed, and he thrust forward with Baragond and Pippin behind him, while Denethor gave back until he stood beside the table within. But there they found Faramir, still dreaming in his fever, lying upon the table. Wood was piled under it and high all about it, and all was drenched with oil, even the garments of Faramir and the coverlets, but as yet no fire had been set to the fuel. Then Gandalf revealed the strength that lay hid in him, even as the light of his power was hidden under his grey mantle. He leaped up onto the wood, and raising the sick man lightly, he sprang down again, and bore him towards the door. But as he did so, Faramir moaned and called on his father in his dream. Denethor started as one waking from a trance, and the flame died in his eyes, and he wept, and he said, "Do not take my son from me, he calls for me." "He calls," said Gandalf, "but you cannot come to him yet, for he must seek healing on the threshold of death, and maybe find it not. Whereas your part is to go out to the battle of your city, where maybe death awaits you. This you know in your heart." "He will not wake again," said Denethor. "Battle is in vain. Why should we wish to live longer? Why should we not go to death side by side?" "Authority is not given to you, Steward of Gondor, to order the hour of your death," answered Gandalf. "And only the heathen kings under the domination of the Dark Power did thus, slaying themselves in pride and despair, murdering their kin to ease their own death." Then, passing through the door, he took Faramir from the deadly house, and laid him on the bier on which he had been brought, and which had now been set in the porch. Denethor followed him, and stood trembling, looking with longing on the face of his son. And for a moment, while all were silent and still, watching the Lord and his throes, he wavered. "Come," said Gandalf, "we are needed. There is much that you can yet do." Then suddenly Denethor laughed. He stood up tall and proud again, and stepping swiftly back to the table, he lifted from it the pillow on which his head had lain. Then coming to the doorway, he drew aside the covering, and lo, he had between his hands a palantir. And as he held it up, it seemed to those that looked on that globe, that the globe began to glow with an inner flame, so that the lean face of the Lord was lit as with a red fire, and it seemed cut out of hard stone, sharp with black shadows, noble, proud, and terrible. His eyes glittered. "Pride and despair!" he cried. "Didst thou think that the eyes of the White Tower were blind? Nay, I have seen more than thou knowest, grey fool, for thy hope is but ignorance. Go then and labor in healing. Go forth and fight. Vanity. For a little space you may triumph on the field, for a day, but against the power that now arises there is no victory. To this city only the first finger of its hand has yet been stretched. All the east is moving in even now. The wind of thy hope cheats thee and wafts up Anduin the fleet with black sails. The west has failed. It is time for all to depart who would not be slaves. Such counsel will make the enemy's victory certain indeed," said Gandalf. "Hope on, then," laughed Denethor. "Do I not know thee, Mithrandir? Thy hope is to rule in my stead, to stand behind every throne, north, south, or west. I have read thy mind and its policies. Do I not know that you commanded this halfling here to keep silence? That you brought him hither to be a spy within my very chamber? And yet in our speech together I have learned the names and purpose of all thy companions. So, with the left hand thou wouldst use me for a little while as a shield against Mordor, and with the right bring up this ranger of the north to supplant me. But I say to thee, Gandalf Mithrandir, I will not be thy tool. I am steward of the house of Anarion. I will not step down to be the dotard chamberlain of an upstart. Even were his claim proved to me, still he comes but of the line of Isildur. I will not bow to such a one, last of a ragged house long bereft of lordship and dignity. What then would you have, said Gandalf, if your will could have its way? I would have things as they were in all the days of my life, answered Denethor, and in the days of my long fathers before me, to be the lord of this city in peace, and leave my chair to a son after me, who would be his own master and no wizard's pupil. But if doom denies this to me, then I will have naught, neither life diminished, nor love halved, nor honor abated. To me it would not seem that a steward who faithfully surrenders his charge is diminished in love or in honor, said Gandalf. and at the least you shall not rob your son of his choice while his death is still in doubt." At those words Denethor's eyes flamed again, and taking the stone under his arm, he drew a knife and strode towards the bier, but Baragron sprang forward and set himself before Faramir. "So," cried Denethor, "thou hadst already stolen half my son's love. Now thou stealest the hearts of my knights also, so that they rob me wholly of my son at the last. But in this at least thou shalt not defy my will, to rule my own end. Come hither," he cried to his servants. "Come, if you are not all recreant." Then two of them ran up the steps to him. Swiftly he snatched a torch from the hand of one and sprang back into the house. Before Gandalf could hinder him, he thrust the brand amid the fuel, and at once it crackled and roared into flame. Then Denethor leaped upon the table, and standing there, wreathed in fire and smoke, he took up the staff of his stewardship that lay at his feet, and broke it on his knee. Casting the pieces into the blaze, he bowed and laid himself on the table, clasping the palantir with both hands upon his breast. And it was said that ever after, if any man looked in that stone, unless he had a great strength of will to turn it to other purpose, he saw only two aged hands withering in flame. Gandalf, in grief and horror, turned his face away and closed the door. For a while he stood in thought, silent upon the threshold, while those outside heard the greedy roaring of the fire within. And then Denethor gave a great cry, and afterwards spoke no more, nor was ever again seen by mortal men. "So passes Denethor, son of Ecthelion," said Gandalf. Then he turned to Baragron and the Lord's servants that stood there aghast. "And so pass also the days of Gondor that you have known. For good or evil they are ended. Ill deeds have been done here, but let now all enmity that lies between you be put away, for it was contrived by the enemy and works his will. You have been caught in a net of warring duties that you did not weave. But think, you servants of the Lord, blind in your obedience, that but for the treason of Baragond, Faramir, captain of the White Tower, would now also be burned. Bear away from this unhappy place your comrades who have fallen, and we will bear Faramir, steward of Gondor, to a place where he can sleep in peace, or die, if that be his doom." Then Gandalf and Baragond, taking up the bier, bore it away towards the houses of healing, while behind them walked Pippin with downcast head. But the servants of the Lord stood gazing as stricken men at the house of the dead. And even as Gandalf came to the end of Rothdainen, there was a great noise. Looking back, they saw the dome of the house crack and smokes issue forth, and then with a rush and rumble of stone it fell in a flurry of fire. But still unabated the flames danced and flickered among the ruins. Then in terror the servants fled and followed Gandalf.